Hi, welcome to SLP 214 for Module 6, Phonological Processes. I'm super excited to jump into phonological process. I feel like this is one of the things that, as a school therapist, is fun to work on because you can see fun, fast progress. And the students really enjoy their time working on these sounds. A lot of these students, you work on phonological awareness first, hearing where those sounds are in words, then you work on placement of the sounds, and then you are working on how do you produce it in words and sentences. Um, a lot of my students that we work on in this have very average language skills. So it's a ton of fun because they make these sentences that are wild sometimes, and they just really enjoy finding where to put that sound in words. So phonological process. We have to be able to diagnose this, talk about what they are in order to understand what they are, and then do our treatment. So phonological process is a predictable error. It's rule-based within your speech. This happens because children simplify their speech patterns while trying to talk like adults, right? They are trying, not all of their phonemes have been developed yet. So they simplify them to their maximal level that they can produce in order to try and talk like us as adults. So, for example, and these are normal at certain ages, right? As you get older, you grow out of them, they become less typical. So, my son is 28 months old, so 2 years, 4 months. I actually had to do the age calculator to remember how old he was. But right now, his big phonological process is he produces for, so it's a higher chuck. The other one is he does t for k, so he's fronting that sound, and d for g, and some cluster simplification. So the other thing that he says a ton, but nobody knows what he's saying right now, is pastars, which is fast cars. Mm-hmm. So it's typical at a certain age, right? It's typical for that. Within your lecture this week, the ASHA website that I put on there, I like reading through that one. It tells you where all of your sounds are supposed, your phonological processes are supposed to stop. And it's always interesting. One thing I will say is boys develop a little bit slower with their phonological processes and their speech development than girls. And also, the other thing is no two children are the same. So there's been a lot of back and forth about when speech sounds develop in the last few years, I would say. And the big thing that we need to remember is that no two children are the same. So saying this is the only time that they can develop that, that's not true, especially with child development being so complex. So as a clinician, your evidence-based practice, utilizing your clinical judgment is always very important when you're deciding what speech sounds to work on and whether or not a child does need speech therapy with those phonological processes. So there's a lot of phonological processes overall. We go over some of your major ones, your most common ones in class. So the first one is cluster simplification. This is when a child simplifies a consonant sequence by deleting one or more of the consonants. So a common one that I always think of is spaghetti for spaghetti, right? Stop for stop, right? Or top for top. You don't have to delete the S at the beginning. It's not that rule based, it's one of those consonants. And you'll notice that most kids are deleting that sound. But I've definitely heard, for example, my son say stop instead of stop before. So typically it's the sound in an S blend. In an L blend, it's more typically your L sound that is deleted. So it's your more complicated sounds. So thinking about the word blend would turn more into bend, right? Now, if we also have some liquid simplification with that, which is where our L's and R's are replaced by W and Y. They become more vowely within our mouths, right? Now, if that's happening with the word bread or blend, it would be more of a wend sound, right? It would be more of a bled, bed, bled, or and then wed, right? So that B would come off, and then the R would change more to a W. Sorry, I got ahead of myself though with the liquid simplification. Important to remember with this, remember you're turning off your English writing brain. So SH, not a consonant cluster. That is one sound, shh, right? CH, it's not a consonant cluster. It is one sound, ch. And TH, it's not a consonant cluster. It is one sound. So those cannot participate by themselves. You can't have the T fall off of the TH with your sound, okay? So making sure you're paying attention to that when you're switching from English into the IPA. Our next one is deaffrication. So this is where an affricate is substituted for a fricative. The fricative is produced in the spot of an affricative. So we would go with, instead of chip, we would say ship, right? The child or client would say that. Mashes or matches. So that ch is going to sh. One that's pretty common is the j to more of your z sound or your j sound. So instead of jumping, it's more of a jumping sound, right? So you get that vibration there. We have, so those are where, so next we have deletion of final consonants or final consonant deletion. You'll see this both ways very often. It's when the final sound of a word comes off. Now remember, take out your spelling brain and put on your IPA brain. Because if we have the word bake, b-a-k, when you're spelling, there's an E at the end, right? But that E is not there in our sounds. So it would be bake goes to bay. That k sound is taken off. I think of it, cap would go to cap, right? So the last consonant in the word is taken off. Next one is final devoicing. So we have initial voicing and final devoicing as two different phonological processes. So final means the end of the word, right? And then devoicing, turning off your voice. So think about your voiced versus your voiceless consonants. This is where a voiced consonant would be at the end of a word, and you're replacing it with its voiceless counterpart, its friend. So if it's a b at the end of the word, it's going to, right? If it's a d at the end of the word, it's going to t. If it's a z at the end of a word, it's going to s. So the voicing goes away at the end of a word. Now, if that's final devoicing, initial voicing is the beginning of a word, right? And with that, the voice is being turned on. So if it's a t, it's going to a d. If it's a p, it turns to a b, right? So our voice is turned on. There's nothing else changed about the process. Where in your mouth does not change in any way, shape, or form. The only thing that changes is the voicing. Really thinking about your place, manner, and voicing is going to be important while you're working on phonological processes.
Just a question, sorry. For the final consonant deletion, is that only like one syllable words usually?
Typically in practice, yes. You will see it mostly in one syllable words. And then when they have that, sometimes you'll also see some of the cluster, not the cluster, multisyllabic words with the syllable reduction then paired with that, where a whole syllable will come off with a longer word, but they also have final consonant deletion in the shorter words.
Shorter.
You see those commonly put together.
All right, that makes sense.
The next one that I wanted to talk about is liquid simplification. So I kind of talked about that one a little bit, But I want you to think about this is one of the most common ones that you will hear now that you're really learning about them. I will say as a student, so I had liquid simplification when I was, gosh, up until I went to speech in third, fourth, and fifth grades for my R's and L's and then my S's. I had an articulation delay with them where and it came out the sides, and I also lisped a little bit at a point. I was a very fun person with my articulation and phonology. Uh, and that's one of the reasons why I absolutely love this, because I truly understand the impact that it can make on your confidence at the end of the day and your ability to participate in conversation. So liquid simplification, those liquids, your ul and your and r, are replaced with w and y. Now, thinking about both of these, think about how hard it is to see where the ul and the sounds occur in your mouth. They're one of our harder sounds to develop because you're really not seeing the That's one in particular is hardest. You don't see it happen in the mouth. So then when you're trying to supply feedback for a student, you really have to work on feeling where your tongue is to make it. So this is a more common one. This is like wed for red, wait or yate for late. So you'll hear it a lot if you're around kids, especially now that we've pointed it out. Next one is fronting. So this one has to do with place, right? The place is changed. So you front a palatal or velar consonant, so it moves to the front of your mouth. Again, this is simpler. So something like going from cat to tat, right? From the back all the way to the front. My voice is still on. They're both still stops, right? I haven't changed anything else besides my place in my mouth. Now, if I start saying dat for cat, then I'm also having some initial voicing at the same time. So chat for cat would be your fronting from k to t. If we were doing a g, the g fronted would be a d for that. That's like saying dud for good. And then one of my favorites is tutti for cookie, right? If you're doing it in one spot, you're most likely doing it in more than one spot overall, unless you're receiving some therapy, then usually initial is easiest, then final, then medial is the hardest spot to develop the sound. Next is stopping. So this is where you replace a fricative or a fricative for a stop sound. So instead of this, we're going dis. To for shoe, right? So you're stopping. So we're changing the manner of the speech sound. And then lastly, syllable reduction. So this is where the child produces a fewer number of syllables than what is in the target word. My 2-year-old Nana for banana consistently. Usually it's 3-syllable to 2-syllable words. Computer turns to pewter often. Trying to think of birthday. Uh, birthday kind of. I'm trying to think. I had an articulation screener the other day, and the student used some some syllable reduction. Birthday was just a mess, though. It was a really hard word for her to say, but I don't remember how she did it. But anyway, syllable reduction, right? Usually 3-syllable to 2-syllable words overall. And then another big point to understand is that by the age of 4, most phonological processes should be diminished, and a child should be 100% intelligible to strangers. Now, when you're looking at your guides to when phonological processes diminish in students and children, you'll see that R's and L's are much later sounds, right? They're more of like a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old. So it means that we can still understand them. They're intelligible. Primarily, their speech is making sense to you, but there still might be errors overall. But by 4, most phonological processes should be diminished and the child should be 100% intelligible to strangers. Okay, I want to go over your assignment a little bit. I'm going to share my screen. I have this also written out, so you're going to get it in an email today. Did I share the screen? Yeah. Okay. So, um, okay. So when you are identifying phonological processes, so your assignment this week, hold on 1 second. Okay. Your assignment this week asks you to take a word and apply a phonological process to it, right? So your best way to do that is by first, first you want to make sure it's written in the IPA, right? Don't have it in English, have it written in the IPA. To identify a phonological process, you're going to pay attention to the place, manner, and voicing, right? These are the key areas to compare when evaluating a production against a targeted production. Remember, you're being a detective with this. So like right now, you're doing your reverse detective work. You're making it happen. So if we were looking at this Buzz Lightyear scooter from last week's assignment, right? We first have a final consonant deletion here. That buzz went to buh. That z sound at the end was completely taken off. Okay. So just thinking about this overall, that sound went from being there to not there, and it's at the final position of the word, final consonant deletion. When we're talking about light year, that was correct. And then when we talk about scooter, we're going from at the beginning, the sk to a t. Now with that, there's two errors occurring. First, there's cluster simplification. That sound was taken off. So it goes from sk to k. Now he's also fronting the k sound. So that's replaced with a t. So we see both of those phonological processes being taking place at the same time. Okay, so we know that in order to know that, right? First we said sk to t, or sorry, this should be it here. One consonant in the cluster is deleted. So one came off, cluster reduction or cluster simplification. And then the next one is that so or from t, right? Both are not voiced, so we know voicing remained the same. They are both stops. You cannot hold on to them, so those remained the same. So the only change that happened was placement, right? The sound is produced at the alveolar ridge versus at the velum or the back of the mouth. Velum's the back of the mouth, the alveolar ridge is the front. That's how we know the phonological process there is fronting, right? So that ties from this week into next week as well. But I wanted us to be able to think through the process going both ways. This week on the quiz, you'll have to identify phonological processes. So what phonological process is this? Like matching. You'll also have to understand intelligibility and everything else we went through in our lecture today overall. But really, those phonological processes are a big portion of the quiz this week. Sharon?